So I get lots of questions about a specific subject, so I want to talk to you about it tonight. And that's intermittent fasting. So let me begin by saying that, if this is something you want to consider, then we probably should set up a call because there's lots of variables. So this is kind of the 100,000-foot overview of intermittent fasting, and uh, you'll see by the end of this that there's a lot of different paths you can take, and it depends on kind of what your goals are, but also what kind of uh, uh, things you're trying to address. So what your goals are, if you have diabetes, high blood pressure, different things like that, is all a factor in here. So, the first thing is what is intermittent fasting? So what it really means is that you basically fast um, at a period of time during the day. So we all do a fast every day when we're sleeping. Now, one of the challenges is we have a surplus in food in our environment. So often in today's world, it's the first time in history that more people are dying secondary to obesity than malnutrition. So we have a surplus of food. And what's happening is we're seeing people not really sitting down and having like 3 meals a day, but really kind of eating all day long. And so we know that concept of just constant eating is actually promoting a lot of disease and illness. And so intermittent fasting is kind of an attempt to take us back to our roots and kind of give our body a time to really kind of rest and digest. And there's a lot of health benefits for it, but it's also, if you've been a person that's been kind of in the state like most of Americans are, where you eat all the time, you may still have 3 big meals a day, but even between those meals, people are often kind of grazing, is what I would call it. And that's causing lots of metabolic processes that are unhealthy for us. And it takes time to counteract those. And so, I begin by saying, if you're going to do this, don't jump right in it, all the way, because you're going to get yourself feeling worse than you are better. So we probably should talk through it a little bit. But I want you to understand what it is, because there are a tremendous amount of health benefits. I personally do intermittent fasting, but you have to do it right, or you're going to get yourself really sick. So there's a million different types of kind of programs on intermittent fasting, because remember what it is it's really just a break in eating. Okay, so the most common one is probably called the 16-8 fasting, which means we fast for 16 hours of the day, and then we feed. Our feeding window is 8 hours of the day. Okay, but there's overnight fasts. Okay, there's alternate day fasts where people will just take one of the days and fast for a 24-hour period. There's one called the 5-2 fast, more challenging because you're going to fast for 48 hours a week. So 7 days in a week, 2 of those days will be fasting. Spontaneous meal skipping, I think that's one that people inadvertently do. It's not something they plan. And that really just means you miss a meal, but it's not on a schedule at all. Probably not the best one to do, because some of the benefits require a prolonged period of time. And if it's a random time that you're not eating, your body just kind of thinks you're in a state of starvation. And so the 20-24 fast means a 4-hour feeding window, fasting for 20. This is called the warrior diet. And then another one is called the OMAD, or 1 meal a day. So some people only eat 1 meal a day. Then a 24-hour fast. And then they have 36-hour fasting on here, but really what that means is prolonged fasting. So once you hit that 36-hour mark, it's any fast greater than 36 hours, okay, is considered a prolonged fast. And I'll talk about the health benefits of that. Now, all of these fasts are what's called wet fast, meaning that you still drink water. You can drink water, black coffee with no additives, or herbal tea with no additives, okay? Now, some people do what's called a dry fast, where they also eliminate any fluid. I wouldn't recommend that for anyone, because your body needs the hydration, and you can really cause a lot of problems with that. That's mostly seen in people that are professional bodybuilders that are preparing for a show. because by creating a little bit of dehydration, it's going to really make their muscle tone stand out more. And so I'm not talking about a dry fast on any of these. All these include that you're still drinking ample water. In fact, you'll probably drink more water than you normally do, or you can drink coffee or tea. But again, not the bulletproof coffee with a bunch of butter in it or anything like that. So it's a true fast where you're not consuming any calories during the fasting period. Now, as we go through this, if you have any questions or comments, just feel free to interrupt me, because I want to make sure this is something of value to you, because there is tremendous health benefits related to fasting. So, this is something that I would encourage everyone to work into because of the health benefits. People often look at the health benefits as simply just weight loss, but I'll talk more about that. But here's an example of the 24 fast. So you're fasting for 20 hours. And your feeding window is what they refer to it, is the period of time you're eating is 4 hours. And so here's the example that you started at 8 in the morning. And you can see as you go throughout the day, they're doing different things. They still incorporate working out. And we'll talk more about that. How do you incorporate exercise with a fast? And then you can see they have their feeding window starts at 4 p.m. and ends at 8 p.m. Other than that, the rest of the time, they're just drinking water or coffee or tea. But again, this is not a starting one. Okay. This is really someone that's done this quite a bit. Because even if you don't have a lot of health concerns, this is a pretty challenging fast to do and not feel like you're making yourself sicker. So the big things to remember on any of these is, first, you got to pick which one you're going to do. So like I said, the 16 and 8 fast is the most common one, which means you're eating for 8 hours, fasting for 16. Okay. Now, people tie that into your sleep, because if you sleep 8 hours, you've got half your fasting done. So often people either start their first breakfast is really around noon, or they have an early dinner, so their fasting is on the other end. So they tie it to their sleeping on all of these. So that the part of your fast is during your sleeping period of time. Now, when people first get into this, like I said, the 16 and 8 is the most common, but often people can't tolerate that because they start to feel dizzy or weak, or just not feeling well during that fast period, because their body's just not used to it. And so what they often will do is do like a 12 and 12, meaning you fast for 12 hours and then feed for 12 hours. And then you slowly build up into that 16 and 8 over a period of time. And again, the 16 and 8 is probably the most common one. Okay. And that's what they mean by here is, first decide what kind of fast you're going to do and then work into it, because you're going to gradually increase your fasting duration. But again, jumping right into a 20 and 4 would probably be problematic. Now, what's also important is during your eating window, that's not a free for all. That doesn't mean you just get to eat whatever you want. You still need to pay attention to what you eat. So it doesn't mean, hey, I can eat a dozen donuts in here. The whole idea is to still maintain your nutritional kind of thoughts, but you're now just condensing that into that fasting window. Now, you may still consume the same amount of calories that you would normally over the period of a day, but you're going to consume that within that fasting window. But still paying attention to your macros, your protein, your carbs, your processed foods, things like that, where you still want to maintain a good, healthy diet during that eating window. Now, again, hydration is so important because a lot of times part of the benefits here is kind of your body starts clearing out waste. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. But your body needs the hydration to do that. So the kidneys need to really be functioning optimally to clean out the waste. So really, hydration is very, very important. Then in addition to this is really paying attention to your hunger levels and your energy levels. So let's say you decide you're going to do a 16 and 8 fast. And during your fast period, you notice that towards the end, you're really starting to have problems with energy and hunger. Then it's okay to back down on it and go ahead and break the fast early, and then maybe shorten the fast period for the next week and kind of build up into that. Because again, it's one of those kind of baby steps. Your goal may be a 16 and 8 fast, but you may not want to start there, or you may start there and feel like you just are having problems. So you're going to back that down and slowly work into that based on kind of what your body's telling you. Now, during your fast there's not a reason not to work out. Okay. But understand the timing of the workout, it can affect the quality of the workout. So remember, if you decide to work out during the fasting period, which often people do, accept the fact that you're going to probably be not 100% in there. In fact, I would encourage you to shoot for more like 80% workout, meaning that you're not going to push yourself as hard because your body's not going to have the reserves that it normally has in for working out. It doesn't mean you don't work out. It just means the intensity is less. Now, on the flip side, if you decide to work out during the feeding window, then I encourage you to work out and push yourself quite a bit. But also understand one of the challenges you have there is not making yourself feel sick because your body's trying to do a workout and digest at the same time. So again, that's paying attention to what your body's telling you, because you can imagine if you're on let's say a 2,000 calorie a day meal plan, and now you're trying to get that in an 8-hour window, you're eating quite a bit in that window, and then you incorporate a workout into that, you may start having some nausea or feeling ill. And so again, if you start to have that, really pay attention to your body and back off, and then maybe consider not doing your workout in the feeding period, or you may want to just actually break your workout up into part in the feeding, part in the fasting. And then the only other thing is, depending on how long a fast you do, you really need to be mindful of how you break the fast. So the 16 and 8 fast is pretty simple to do, and you can break it without really much thought process. The longer the fast you go, so let's say you do a 36-hour fast, then you're going to want to break it by you starting with things like maybe some bone broth or something like that, because understand your gut biome, your bacteria in your guts have been really disrupted during a prolonged fast. And so if you just go right into eating heavily, you're going to have some GI disturbances with that. So starting slow when you reintroduce food is going to be really, really important, but it's more important for the longer the fast you have. Now, the longest fast ever recorded in the medical literature was almost a year long, but that was heavily medically managed. That person had a lot of things that were being monitored during that, because once you start going over 36 hours, it's important to really consider medical monitoring, because you can start to have electrolyte malfunction, things like that. And so I don't really encourage prolonged fast without some type of supervision. Now, there's also another fast called fasting mimickers. It's called proline. And what it is it's a kit to fast for 7 days. But what it is you're still consuming anywhere from 500 to 600 calories a day, but the food items are pre-planned, and so they call them fasting mimickers because it doesn't stimulate any of the normal functions of the digestive system, like your insulin response and things like that. So you're still getting some calories, but your body thinks it's fasting. And so really pay attention to breaking the fast, because you don't want to have a bunch of GI disturbances either. Tanya, did you have a question?
Actually, I think Rose did. She had a thing in the chat.
Oh.
Rose, do you want to go ahead and ask it?
I guess I don't understand what fasting's of, because when I hear like 8 and 16 or 12 and 12, I'm thinking a day or maybe two. But by the way you're explaining things, is this something that takes place over several days, and that's why it's
So
working the way you're working?
So it can be 1 day. So 16 and 8 is a 24-hour period. So it's a 1 day fast. And during that time, you'll fast for 8 hours. I mean, you'll fast for 16 hours and you'll eat for 8 hours. So that's the most common one. So every day, you're fasting for 16, eating for 8. So like I said, every day I do a 16 and 8 fast. So my eating window is from noon to 8 p.m. So
Oh,
every
okay,
day,
I see.
all the food I'm going to consume is during that period. And that's what I mean is there's lots of different ones. So the 5-5-2 is based on a week, meaning that you'll eat for 5 days and you'll fast completely for 2 days. So it does depend on what type of fast you're talking about, whether it's hours in the day. So the 20-4 is 20 hours of fasting, 4 hours of feeding. Okay.
And you can do that every day or just once or twice a week.
Yeah. So
Okay.
when
Okay.
we'll talk about the health benefits, because the longer the fast, the more health benefits you're going to get.
Okay.
But you have to kind of work up to that because depending on where you're at metabolically, um, it can be a real challenge for you. So let's talk about the benefits. Now, most people start intermittent fasting to lose weight, and to be honest with you, it's probably you lose weight on intermittent fasting, but that's probably one of the lower benefits of intermittent fasting, because if you think about it, you know, uh, you could do intermittent fasting and really be gluttonous and eat a ton of food and actually gain weight. And so it's really paying attention to what you're eating during those fasting windows. And that's why I said you still need to pay attention to what your nutrition components, your macros and things like that. It's not a free pass just to eat whatever you want during your feeding windows. Okay. But what happens, to the body is they segment it by time, and it's very artificial. Okay. But what happens is the body starts to enter a state of fast. It starts to do things where it thinks, oh my goodness, we're entering a famine. So it doesn't know when we're going to eat again. And so it starts to say, you know what, we got to get efficient. So old cells that are kind of not working so well, it actually breaks those down. So your body does something called autophagy, which is the digestion of old cells. So your body will actually find old cells that are not working efficiently and break those down so it can use the products of those old cells to create new cells that are more efficient. Okay. Now, one area of research on this is actually in cancer patients. They're seeing lots of success in cancer patients in this realm, in incorporating these prolonged fasts with cancer patients, because cancer cells are actually very inefficient cells because they're growing so rapidly. And so the first thing that happens is it really just starts this major house cleaning process throughout your whole body. Now, depending on what organ system we're talking about is what benefit you get. So think of it just like, that you got company coming over and they're real important. So you're cleaning everything. Okay. But the results of cleaning the kitchen is going to be different than cleaning the living room. Okay. So when you think of this going on in your brain, it's very neuroprotective. So it's helping, with things that preventing Alzheimer's disease, dementia, because it's cleaning up those kind of neurotoxins that are being deposited in the brain. That's just part as the body goes on. That's what oxidative stress is these different cells are placed under stress. That's just what happens. Your body has to clean those up. But if it's not efficient at cleaning those up, then they start to build up and pile up and results in illness. So a fast is a period of time where you're really just undertaking some major house cleaning. Okay, so you're going to see things like your metabolism greatly improved, meaning that your body's now more efficient in using insulin, your growth hormones, things like that. Okay, but your immune system is going to be greatly improved, because it's really, like I said, it's just really cleaning up everything. And so when you look at the literature on fasting, it depends on what organ system you're looking at, but it literally is improving every organ system. Now, the challenge with the weight loss is because of ketosis. And really, when you get into ketosis, which means your body's now converting from carbohydrates to fat or triglycerides or to actual protein for energy, it starts to make ketone bodies, because there's no glucose around. And that typically takes about 36 hours. And that's why this isn't probably the ideal one for people that want to lose weight, because you have to start to fast pretty long to really start to benefit from weight loss. Now, weight maintenance, that's a different story. It's outstanding for maintaining your weight, and it's outstanding for a whole plethora of other disease entities that we all worry about: your heart disease, your stroke, your neurological diseases like dementia and Alzheimer's. Uh, Literally, almost any disease pathology, this is helping kind of eliminate it or prevent it from even starting. Because we all fear getting cancer, and the reality of it is all of us have cancer cells in our body, but our immune system is able to keep them in check. So we don't ever develop cancer because those cancer cells are quickly destroyed by a well-functioning immune system. And when you develop cancer is when the cancer cells start to win over the body's kind of protective mechanisms. And intermittent fasting is one of those mechanisms that really gives your body time to do house cleaning, to clean out those bad cells. But cancer is just one example. Okay, like I said, if you're struggling with cardiovascular disease, it's very helpful in both the heart and the vascular system on cleaning out those potential plaques that we worry about. So there's tremendous benefits beyond just weight loss. And that's why I encourage people to really undertake it, is even that 16 and 8 fast offers benefits. So what I personally do is I do a 16 and 8 fast every day. And then about every quarter, I do a prolonged 7-day fast. Now I got to be pretty strategic when I do a 7-day fast, because a multitude of reasons. If I'm having to travel or things like that, those types of things impact the quality of the fast. So changing in my environment, my temperature, humidity can either help me or hurt me. So, the 16 and 8 fast is pretty easy to do every day to build up to it. And then the prolonged fast just takes more strategic management. But I also tell Tanya can attest that every time I do a prolonged fast, about day 5, I tell her, I wish I could feel the way I feel right now every day, because it's amazing. When you hit that point in a fast, the clarity you have, of just how well it seems like everything is really functioning. And then also one thing that you need to consider is consider it almost like a baby detox, because when you reintroduce foods, really pay attention to the foods you reintroduce. Okay. So you may be having food items that you don't think you have any problem with, but for the next 24 hours, I would try to reintroduce one food item at a time and see how your body responds to it, because you'll be really enlightened. So for me, for the last time I did a prolonged fast, I noticed that artificial sweeteners really set me off for inflammation. And you can go Google that and look at the literature, and there's no real hard scientific evidence that artificial sweeteners are pro-inflammatory. But after doing it, I was able to put the connection together and then test that theory on myself. And I realized that artificial sweeteners are something that actually promote inflammation, meaning that my joints hurt. And so I realized that I'm going to stop having artificial sweeteners, because that's something. And I've been doing these fasts for years, and so I think that's part of the mindfulness, is every time try to also learn from it, and learn. If you suspect there's a food item you suspect might be a problem, that's a good time to test it and see how you respond to it, especially if you're doing a little bit longer fast, because it's very telling how your body responds to things. So that's all I have. Is there any questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
I have a question. You said you try to put things back in one at a time in the next 24 hours, but sometimes it takes 3 days for something to show up.
Yeah.
So how can you?
Yeah. So I would do a minimum of 24 hours. Okay. But you're absolutely right. If you can stretch that out a little longer, then you're going to get better information, especially if you suspect something. So what I do when I break a long prolonged fast is I usually start with a broth, like a bone broth or something like that, because I don't want to get the GI upset. You can get some GI disturbances on a prolonged fast. But then I will move into like one kind of component of my macros. I'm usually do carnivore diet, just to be honest with you. And so I will move into beef and then stay with that for a while and then add either, a different meat or something like that. So the longer the problem is once you break a fast, you're going to get hungry because your body's going to stop making those ketones. And so, it's being strategic. And so I try to front load with the macros that are more calorie dense, your proteins and your fats before I do carbs, because those are the ones that are going to stimulate the most from you in the sense of hunger and insulin response and things like that. But taking that longer period of time is very beneficial. But really try to just pay attention, because sometimes you will see a reaction rather quickly.
Okay.
Any other questions?
I assume as a diabetic that it's not necessarily a good thing, especially when I already know that if I skip a meal, it can really screw me up.
Yeah, and that's why, diabetes, it's not that diabetics can't do it, but diabetics are ones we really have to watch. And so it also becomes strategic on what your meals look like to make sure we're getting enough good calories that are going to hold us through that fasting period. And that's why diabetics typically would start with a shorter fasting window, because your body will figure this out. You just got to give it time. But you also want to make sure that the calories you're getting are the calories that are going to, more of your protein and your fat going into a fast versus a carb diet. But definitely, and that's what I was going to say. If any of you really have more of an interest in doing this, then we probably should talk about the specifics related to around your health. And then we can have more of a strategic plan to work for you, because diabetics are probably the most challenging ones to put in intermittent fasting, but they're also the ones that probably benefit the most from the intermittent fasting.
Just as an FYI, if anybody anybody else is diabetic, I wear one of those gadgets that I can monitor my blood sugar, 24/7. And when I was strictly doing the program of making sure that I ate at the same time and just those meals and no snacking, I discovered I would have to have something later in the evening before I went to bed. And I'm personally real bad about eating correctly on Saturdays. Saturdays, I tend to skip meals, maybe eat just once or maybe twice if I'm lucky. And my sister actually had to point it out to me, but I just, it doesn't do well for me at all. I lose my mind, so to speak. I can't think straight.
Yeah,
And it took somebody else pointing it out to me.
yeah, and that's a real physiological response too, Rose. I mean, that's really, that's what happens. And so the continuous glucose monitoring is nice because it also has warning systems in place to let people know that your blood sugar is getting low. But again,
Yeah.
it's one of those things that's not impossible. It's a slower process, is what I would say. I wouldn't say it's any more challenging. It's just we have to go a lot slower in doing it. Especially with diabetics, and especially depending on how much insulin do you take, insulin, or are you on just oral medicine. And that's why I'm saying is, if you guys anyone has an interest, then let us know, and we can work with you directly just to make sure we're doing it as safely as possible, because there are tremendous benefits. I don't want to scare you into not doing it, but I want to be real with you and let you know that we got to do it. We got to be cautious, but there are tremendous benefits in it.
one thing that I think we've seen like firsthand, especially with people with exercise and stuff too, is the quality of the food that you're eating during your actual eating window definitely affects big time the fasting time, especially if you're going through a transition phase of trying to just start going into fasting too. So I always tell people like start slow into it. So if we're starting with a bigger window, say 12 hours of eating or something like that, you don't want to go from 12 hours of eating to 4 hours of eating in 1 week. You want to go from 12 hours to 11 to 10 down to like working your way to that point, especially if you're diabetic though too, because that way you can kind of manage how your body responds to as you go into that longer fasting period too, because then you can see how your body is too, because a lot of times it might not necessarily be that you need to decrease your fasting period. You need to look more at what is the macronutrients and micronutrients you're getting during that time that you're actually eating too, because that's also what's going to fuel you through that time through your fasting window too. Like part of the reason fasting can be beneficial is also because then you go to a point where your body is using different energy sources. So let's say if I go eat something kind of sugary or high in carbs before I go do some cardio, the whole time I'm doing cardio, my body is then just burning the blood sugars that are in my blood sugars. Versus if I'm in a fasting window and I'm doing it right, then my body's going to be more efficient with how it's getting my energy, and that energy source then is going to be burning my body fat, not necessarily my blood sugars and so on too. So like kind of what Dr. Cox saying, you want to make sure that we're transitioning correctly till you get to that point. So for somebody, it might take them 1 week to get to an 8 hour of eating window and 16 hours of fasting. And for other people, it might be 10, 12 weeks of slowly working their way to that point. But it's not impossible to get to that point. You just have to manage it as you go. And part of that is like responding to how your body responds to it. So if you find that there's days that you have those lows or those highs or that sense, then you need to look and kind of reflect on what you're eating during that time and readjust, retest it again and see how your body responds to it. And more or less, you want to be able to find the nutrients in the food that you can actually consume that's going to get you through those fasting windows too. The other thing too is I would say kind of like what he was saying, carnivore. Carnivore is a good aspect of it because one of the things that we do sometimes worry about with fasting windows is under eating the micronutrients and macronutrients that you need to. And when I go to a carnivore diet, necessarily kind of high protein, low carb in that sense, then I'm going to have the food that's satiating. So I'm going to not be as hungry during that fasting window and so on too. So it's not always that like if you have like a negative effect necessarily the first time you go into a fasting thing, it's not necessarily because the time that you're fasting, it's more or less because you're not giving yourself the proper nutrients during the time that you're eating. Does that make sense?
What about if you have some kidney disease going on? Is fasting hard on the kidneys? Because the more, I thought the more protein you ate, the harder it was for your kidneys.
Yeah, so we're learning that that's not true. So people that are in kidney failure have to watch their protein, but people that maybe have what I'd say kidney insufficiency, then they can pretty much consume the normal amount of protein as long as they're staying hydrated and drinking plenty of water. Okay. Now, part of the challenge is if you go, especially if you're diabetic and go ask your endocrinologist about this, they're going to say absolutely not. So this is one of those things where we kind of get in conflict with traditional medicine, is because an endocrinologist is going to tell you eat carbs and frequent small meals all day long. But if you think about it, that is actually the thing that's keeping your insulin levels high in that meal plan. And so if we can, and I'm not talking type 1 diabetics, okay, that are in insulin absent. I'm talking type 2 diabetics that may be on insulin, but they have an insulin sensitivity problem. And so that's the challenge though, is your body is accustomed to that insulin all the time. And so if you're not giving it the carbs, you are going to feel sick. And that's why we got to be very strategic on how we manage that fasting window compared to the feeding window, but then leaning heavily on the specifically the proteins, because like Reed said, it's going to keep you full longer and it's going to be an energy source that's around longer than the carbs. Okay. And it's going to push your body into that burning fat metabolism over the glucose metabolism because it doesn't have a choice because they aren't available. But during that window, if we don't manage it right, you can feel sick.
One thing to hit off that too with exercise, whether you're exercising during your fasting window or during the time that you're actually eating in that sense too, your body can adjust to both of them. I've seen people that they're used to working out and they're used to eating before working out, and then they go to transition to being fasted. And at first, it initially is like, might feel nauseous, might feel lightheaded, things like that too. But your body can adjust those things. So especially if you're trying to readjust your schedule to fit a fasting window, and let's say that your workout time fits into a time where you're not eating, your body can manage that. You just want to make sure that you're being smart about getting into it too, not overwhelming yourself and just looking more or less to kind of get through the motions and warm your body up to that point too. But more or less, kind of whether you choose if to eat, to work out during your fasting window or not, you can do either one. You just want to be smart when you're adjusting, switching from one to the other.
Yeah, and Sheila put in the comments, what about type 1 diabetics? They can still do it. We just have to be more strategic. And so these are ones that we would want CGM or the continuous glucose monitoring, because what we want to do is we want to run your glucose as low as physiologically as normal, but which is the healthiest thing for you to prevent all the bad diseases of diabetes. But the problem is when we run it on that, what is the low end of normal, you're at risk of getting too low. And so we'd want a continuous glucose monitor. So we have mechanisms in place. So if you are getting too low, then we also know when you're getting low, because we can also adjust that window. Because sometimes the window is also depending on the time of day. So sometimes, like I said, mine's noon to 8. It might be better to be 10 to 6. You know, there's a lot of factors in intermittent fasting, not just the time period, but the time. So not just when you eat, but what you eat and how you're eating. So type 1s can still do it. They just become more of a challenge in monitoring them. And that's the hard reality. But again, it's almost like it's a double-edged sword. The people that are the most difficult to manage in doing it are often the people that benefit the most from it.
Sounds awfully complicated.
Well, then that's why, if you don't have diabetes, you can work into the 16 and 8 pretty easy. If you have diabetes, then start slow and work up to it, and probably have some guidance along the way.
When you say you're on a 16 and 8, yeah, how do you manage to get all the protein you're supposed to get in that period of time?
So that's one of the challenges is and that's one of the things that why I do carnivore. What carnivore basically means all I eat is meat. Okay. And so, yeah, you're right. Because remember, I eat to live. I don't live to eat. Because you're right, that the face you just made, you're absolutely right. There's days I'm like, I can't eat any more hamburger, or any more chicken or something like that. But I tell myself I'm eating to support my health. I'm not eating to necessarily enjoy a donut. You know what I mean? But that's one of the challenges is, so protein is a challenge. Now some people do protein meal replacements. I'm not a big fan of that, meaning like the shakes. Now Reed will probably disagree with me because Reed's protein intake, because he's trying to be a big muscle builder. So his protein intake's way higher than mine. So he has to supplement with shakes because he probably truly can't eat enough food to get the proteins that he needs. But I encourage people to try to get your protein naturally through like chicken, there is vegan, soy and stuff, but there's some debate on the quality of that. So if you're not a vegetarian, your meat proteins are the best. But it can be a challenge in that 8-hour window.
Yeah, my gut does not like eating red meat much at all. So it'd be really hard to get to be eating that much chicken every day.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
like
so-
to switch it up with different fish and things like that too, if you can, depending on what your diet is too. But there's quite a lot of different protein sources if you actually dig into it. And some of them obviously are going to be a little bit better quality than others too. But there's definitely a lot of different options you can do as far as like how you prepare them and so on too. And no, I do actually agree about the protein intake. I only supplement with my protein when I'm like shooting for 200 plus grams of protein, 250 grams of protein and things like that and I first and foremost, I try to only supplement on days that I find at the end of the day, I notice I'm short for it. So I think your whole foods, your natural foods are going to be best for it too. There is also a lot of different sources that you can get high protein stuff that aren't necessarily meats too, depending on what your diet is. Kind of like what he's saying, there's different soy things, different types of yogurts, and different cottage cheeses if your diet allows dairy and so on. Everyone's is a little different too, but if you're struggling with getting the protein goal, try to look at widening your variety of protein sources.
Yeah, the Greek yogurt's a great protein source. Just be cautious of the sugar.
If you ever use sour cream on something, like you meal prep with like a taco style or something like that, I think that's a great option for it, is to use Greek yogurt, just the plain, because it's definitely a good alternative to sour creams that it's going to be very similar to. And then you just get a little bit extra protein with it too.